So before we move on to our main presentation and before I introduce Ruth officially, I'd just like to start with a quick recap of our current housing situation. And we all know what dire straits we're in. According to a recent 2016 McKinsey report, California, as we all know, needs to build millions of housing units in the next 6 years to address the current shortage and regain any semblance of affordability. But the pace of California development costs are so high that it's actually slowing, with some developers suspending projects of even multi-million-dollar condos and $4,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment because they just don't pencil out. Those of us who bought here and moved here years ago can sit back and watch that and watch our own property values escalate exponentially. But underlying that, we all know that there is a greater cost to our own existences, which will soon become untenable without teachers, emergency workers, medical workers, restaurant workers, and the like. It's easy to feel insular until we start to feel the pain ourselves. So how does that affect us here in Los Altos? Well, nobody in particular wants to see high density or large housing developments. Will we tolerate even the slightest accommodations, allowing for something as easy as an ADU in our neighbor's backyard so that they can age in place or provide affordable housing for a teacher or an emergency responder? These are the questions we need to resolve here in our own community. So today, LACC is pleased to welcome Ruth Ferguson, Field Representative for our 24th Assemblyman Marc Berman's office, to help us make sense of the 2019 legislative session and the housing bills which were passed into law this year. Ruth joined Marc Berman's staff in March of 2019. Prior to joining the office, she worked as Deputy Campaign Manager on Susan Ellenberg's successful campaign for Santa Clara County Supervisor, and as the Program Manager for Social Entrepreneurship at the nonprofit Hillel International. Ruth graduated from the University of Washington in Seattle with a degree in political science. So with that, I'd like to welcome Ruth, and thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about the many bills that passed through the legislature this past legislative session related to housing. I just kind of wanted to give a little bit of an overview of our office and kind of what we do in the district office as well as our capital office. So like Nancy said, I work for Assemblymember Marc Berman, who represents the 24th District in the California State Assembly. So Assemblymember Berman splits his time between Sacramento and his district. And so when he's in Sacramento, in the Capitol, he's working with our Capitol team. And they work day in and day out on the kind of minutia in each of the bills that goes through the legislature. And just from some context, if you're not already familiar, about 5,000 bills are introduced in the legislature every term. So that's a lot. And as you can imagine, there are quite a few bills on housing, and they change dramatically through the process. They get amended, some die. So it can be a lot to track, and that's really kind of their expertise. And then in the district office, we are really tasked with being the eyes and the ears of the district for Assemblymember Berman while he's in Sacramento. And so when we are out in the community, we're meeting with groups like yours, hearing from constituents or organizations, companies, kind of whoever has a concern that they want to share with us or an idea. And then we're relaying that to Assemblymember Berman, as well as kind of keeping up to date with what's going on legislatively. So, with that said, I'm really excited to be here to talk with you about these bills and answer any questions that I can answer. And also with the caveat that I may not have an answer to a specific question if you have a very specific question about a bill, but I would be very happy and excited to help you find that answer kind of offline. I'll give my email at the end of this, but also I have cards on me, so feel free to flag me down. So first of all, I wanted to start by just kind of outlining the budget that passed through the legislature and was signed by the governor in June of this year. So this budget specifically allocated a historic nearly $2.5 billion toward housing and related infrastructure investments. So those include $750 million for short-term planning and infrastructure, $500 million to support low and moderate income housing, $500 million to increase the state's housing tax credit, $20 million for legal assistance to renters facing eviction, and $650 million for emergency shelters and permanent supportive housing. So with each of these buckets, they're kind of allocated differently. Some are still in the process or have yet to be kind of allocated to cities and counties. And then also portions of these buckets also will be in like a competitive grant-based system. So if you have questions about any of these, I can find out kind of the specifics of where those are going and if there are any kind of competitive grants that you may be interested in, any of your organizations or agencies. But yeah, that's kind of an overview. And then also, in this same budget, there was $1 billion allocated to help cities and counties fight homelessness, which obviously I think it has to be intertwined in the discussion that we're having about housing, because in the state of California, 1/5 of the entire country's homeless population is in our state, especially in the midst of a housing crisis. It's something that's undeniable that we can't ignore. So that $1 billion includes homelessness emergency aid to local governments for emergency housing vouchers, rapid rehousing programs, and emergency shelter construction. Increased mental health supports. So this is really exciting because it's kind of a recognition that individuals who are homeless often need more than just a housing option, that really mental health resources and kind of whole person care services need to be included in this discussion. And then lastly, funding for rapid rehousing and basic needs initiatives for students in the UC, CSU, and California Community College system. So this last piece is something that our office is really excited about. If some of you may be familiar, Assemblymember Berman authored a bill this last legislative session, AB 302, which would have required community colleges to provide safe parking lots for their registered students who are taking at least 6 credits and are in good standing with the community college. And unfortunately, that bill changed dramatically with some amendments in the Senate really late in the legislative session, and Assemblymember Berman decided to pull the bill because it really changed kind of the intended outcome of the bill. But so it's exciting to see that this funding is still available to help students because, as we know, 19% of just community college students alone face housing insecurity every year, or are actually housing unstable at the time that they were asked in this survey. So that is very exciting, but obviously there's still more work to be done. And so that's kind of the reason why there were so many bills that passed through the legislature this year that specifically addressed housing. So the 4 bills I want to focus on today are really pivotal. There are many other bills, and I have them listed at the end of this presentation, and I'm happy to go through those as well. But the 4 kind of main ones that we've been hearing about and that have been either really exciting or concerning to people in our district are AB 1482 by Assemblymember Chu, which creates a statewide rent cap and eviction protections. This is supposed to be SB 330, just a typo, by Senator Skinner, which streamlines permitting and approval processes, bans downsizing or decreasing zoning capacity, and provides more certainty with impact fees. AB 68 by Assemblymember Ting, which facilitates the development of more ADUs and addresses barriers to building. And AB 881 by Assemblymember Bloom, which prohibits local agencies from instituting owner occupancy requirements for ADUs. So to jump right into it, so AB 1482, AB 1482 is a bill that we're hearing quite a lot about, and we have been for the past few months, really since it passed through the legislature and then eventually was signed. So this bill, it goes into effect on January 1st and has a sunset of 10 years. And so some cities in our district, like Menlo Park and Redwood City, have instituted emergency ordinances to protect tenants immediately, but for everybody else, it goes into effect on January 1st. And so come January 1st, so there are two parts to this. One is there's a rent cap, and the other is it creates just cause eviction protection. So with the rent cap, come January 1st, tenants rent, if they've been living there for the past 9, 10 months or more, their rent will have to go back, it's retroactive, so it'll have to go back to the date it was on March 15th of this year. So that's to ensure that, in this 3-month span between the bill being signed and it actually coming into effect, landlords aren't able to jack up rent and then, start from a higher place. And unfortunately, we are hearing from a lot of constituents who are having that issue, even in the short time span. And with kind of the 60 days noticing, in the end, they maybe only have to pay 1 month of really dramatically increased rent, but it's still, it can be really, really difficult, obviously, for people who don't have a big safety net. So this is really exciting, even though obviously it would have been great from my perspective if it had gone into effect immediately. That was a compromise that was made likely from the bill author. So it creates this statewide rent cap of 5% plus CPI, or 10%, whichever ends up being lower, which in my eyes is actually a pretty big increase, that it can go up every year. And so if you really think about it, over the course of 10 years, because this bill can only last for 10 years, your rent could go up almost double the amount that it is once you start in 2020. So that's it's obviously a great protection, but it doesn't. It also is obviously a compromise in my eyes. So this bill institutes just cause eviction requirements for landlords who are seeking to evict tenants who are renting for at least 12 months. So there are two different reasons that a landlord must give or must have if they're seeking to evict a tenant who's been there over 12 months. And those are at-fault reasonings and no-fault reasonings. So at-fault would be something like something that you did that broke your lease. Maybe it's having a subletter that you didn't tell your landlord about or wasn't in your lease agreement, or doing something illegal on the property. And I can kind of outline those if people are interested in the specifics, but I think you can kind of imagine what those would be. And then no-fault reasonings include, like, if the landlord wanted to make significant changes, or not changes, but they had to make significant renovations and improvements to the apartment or unit, and those renovations would last more than 30 days, then they are able to evict a tenant, but with a no-fault reasoning, they must provide the tenant 1 month's rent relocation assistance. So again, I mean, it's protection, but it also, it's not like landlords can't ever evict tenants, which is a concern that we had been hearing. So in our eyes, this provides necessary protections for tenants across the state. That's why the legislature really enthusiastically supported this bill. And again, it still allows for landlords' discretion to charge fairly substantial rent increases every year. Great, so that is that one. Let's move on to SB 330. So this bill goes into effect again on January 1st. All of these bills, or all the 4 bills I'm talking about, go into effect on the 1st of the year. And this has a sunset of 5 years. So this bill is based on the premise that a lot of the housing in California that needs to be built has actually already been approved in concept by local governments. And according to a 2019 report, it showed that cities and counties in California had actually approved for about 2.8 million new housing units. But different, kind of barriers in this approval process made it difficult, or kind of make it impossible sometimes for building to actually occur. So this is designed to speed up housing construction in California in the next 5 years by slashing the time it takes to obtain building permits, limiting fee increases on housing applications, capping the number of public hearings to 5, which is important, and barring local governments from reducing the number of homes that can be built. It greenlights affordable and market rate housing that already meets local zoning rules and prevents cities from enacting new regulations that might limit housing production. And just as an interesting figure, so California currently ranks 49th in the whole country for the number of housing units per capita. which I thought that was fairly shocking. And the median home price is more than $610,000, which obviously is much higher than most Californians can afford. And also nearly a third of California's renters have to spend more than half of their income on housing, which obviously then leaves very little room for a safety net, for, if you're going to school, if you have children, et cetera. So also under this bill, cities and counties are prohibited from hiking fees or changing permit requirements once the project applicant has submitted all of the preliminary required information. It prohibits moratoriums and downsizing, ensuring that cities cannot limit new housing capacity. And really importantly, this new law also includes anti-displacement measures, so it bans the demolition of affordable and rent-controlled units unless the developers replace all of them, pay to rehouse tenants, and offer those renters first right of return at the same rent when the new building is built. So this bill, so HCD will release a list of all cities and counties that this bill will apply to. Before January 1st of this year, obviously, because that's when it goes into effect. So I got in touch with the author's office, I guess like a week and a half ago, and they said that list hadn't been released yet, but the assumption was that there wouldn't be any city in the Bay Area that would be exempted from this bill. I think it's really reserved, the exemptions would be reserved for smaller cities that would have a more difficult time with this. And so although I can't say with certainty right now that Los Altos would be included in this, it seems very likely. Yeah, did you have a question?
So, yeah, that last point, rent-controlled units, well, if all of the units in California are rent-controlled, then all units are covered. Is there, so...
Are you saying because of AB 1482?
Yeah, the previous one.
So that's actually considered a rent cap. Which is different from rent control. Rent control is, determined by like a governing board that decides. I mean, they're two separate things. So even though units may be covered under that rent cap under AB 1482, that isn't what I'm referring to with this bill.
That's not rent control. That's a rent cap.
Right. Yes.
What's the difference?
I think I just said it. So rent control is determined by a governing board, and I don't know if Zach wants to jump in with more information on.
Rent control is governed by a governing board and it is CPAC. A rent cap is just this is more anti-rent gouging, which is like a 10% increase is very different from a CPI increase. And so based on the definition for the purposes of this bill is cost of options related. So that's everything that is before 1985 and it is set. So like this is probably market and Mountain View is sort of they have a form of it, but I have to look more carefully into the specific units. But I know in Los Altos there are units that are controlled and have had rent control board approved since the start of the city. And so a lot of those units are represented. But nothing in Los Altos, Palo Alto, Sunnyvale.
Those numbers are not certain.
Now we are not certain, just because of how new it is and how sort of bucks. But in theory, it would be covered. Well, they have to.
So yeah, great. Yeah, Gary.
Quick question. Is this just single-family housing or multi-family as well?
I believe it applies to both. Yeah. Did you have a question?
No, I just came from East Palo Alto, spent 11 years there, so there's a whole regulatory scheme related to the cost of opt-ins and the board, and so it's almost two separate kind of, it's a whole other discussion. East Palo Alto is not the only city, Oakland has it, some other cities, but there's a whole other regulatory scheme, so that would be a whole talk, just
no.
I some of the questions.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
When the tenant moves out, the landlord could raise it as much as he wanted to.
With AB 1482. Yes. Yeah, so once a tenant moves out, and there are so many different rules also about like adding roommates and kind of how things restart, but if somebody moves out, then the landlord can do whatever they want with the rent. It just is trying to protect tenants who are currently in their units, and obviously, future tenants from just cause eviction, and from just being able to really plan for and anticipate what rent increases could look like, because obviously, I think everyone knows, and we definitely hear from a lot of people who are just forced out of their units because of these, skyrocketing rents. Any other questions on this? Great. Okay, so great. So and one more thing I wanted to say about AB 1482, and I'm glad Zach brought up Costa-Hawkins, is it only applies to housing, it doesn't apply to housing that was built in the past 15 years. And that continues to move as the years go on, if that makes sense. So, great. Next is AB 68 by Assemblymember Ting. So this bill goes into effect on January 1st. So it applies to ADUs. There were quite a few bills that actually passed through the legislature this year concerning ADUs. And ADUs are an important tool for cities to use to reach their housing goals. I think a lot of cities and counties, and obviously the state, are recognizing that this is a way to increase housing production and supply while still kind of maintaining some of the interests and values that people have, especially in R1 zoning with single-family homes. So this bill eliminates the minimum lot size requirements for adding an ADU. It also requires proposed ADUs to be approved or denied within 60 days, and previously that was 120 days, so that's a dramatic decrease. It also allows ADUs to be added inside existing apartment buildings, typically via conversion of parking garages. And so the bill states basically that cities have to allow for at least 800 square feet for an ADU, and they can decide a higher maximum, but they can't go lower than a maximum of 800 square feet. And there's some other rules too about, that maximum also has to be 16 feet high, and I think it was like 4 feet, like a 4-foot setback in the rear and side. Yeah, so there are some specifics about this, but basically it makes the process for submitting a permit for an ADU easier, a shorter time period, and also it kind of encourages cities to allow ADUs that just increase housing production. It also, I don't know if I said this, it bans local agencies from requiring off-street parking in the event of a converted garage or carport conversion into an ADU, which is big. And so previously, if there was an existing single-family or multifamily dwelling on a lot, permitting agencies had 128 days to act on that application. And like I said, this bill requires 60 days. And so just like every city in the state, this bill will apply to Los Altos, and it creates a standard for all cities to meet when addressing ADU permit applications. Great. So next up is AB 881. So it also is regarding ADUs. So this bill, again, goes into effect on January 1st, and it has a sunset of 5 years. And so this limits the criteria by which a local agency may determine where ADUs may be permitted. Basically, it just prohibits a local agency from instituting an owner occupancy requirement for ADU applications, and it takes some of the discretion away from cities, again, trying to increase the production of this type of housing. And so you don't need to live in the main house to, apply to build an ADU, and also to rent out an ADU. And it again also bans a local agency from instituting a parking requirement for units that are within a half-a-mile walking distance from public transit, which, as some people may know, can sometimes be the difference between being able to build an ADU and not being able to build an ADU. So that is that for those 4. I can go through these other bills very quickly. Maybe I'll just read through them. And if there are questions about any of these, then again, I'm happy to try to answer them and to follow up if necessary. So SB 329 says landlords cannot discriminate on the basis of housing vouchers, like Section 8 vouchers. AB 1110 requires a 90-day notice for residential rent increases of more than 10%, which is really great because under AB 1482, single-family homes are not included in that, and also like condominiums and duplexes where the landlord is living in a unit. So this covers those rent increases of more than 10% for that other rental housing. AB 1763 creates unlimited density in the density bonus for 100% affordable housing near transit, and it includes 3 additional stories if this 100% affordable housing is within a half mile of a transit stop. And I actually was just talking with a city council member from San Mateo who was so excited because they are going to be able to utilize this with a new affordable housing project that they have in their city, and they'll be able to get, I think it was like over 60 new units just by getting that housing bonus, the density bonus. AB 1483 requires local jurisdictions to publicly share information about zoning ordinances, development standards, fees, exactions, and affordability requirements. It also requires the Department of Housing and Community Development to develop and update a 10-year housing data strategy. AB 1485 will build on existing environmental streamlining law and encourage moderate income housing production. And AB 1487 allows MTC to raise money for the 9 counties in the Bay Area for the 3 Ps, which are produce new units, preserve housing, and protect tenants. There are a lot more. I won't continue to go through them. Well, maybe I'll. So this AB 587 provides an air exemption for affordable housing exemption organizations to sell deed-restricted land. SB 13 restricts the impacts fees that can be charged on ADUs, which is really exciting. It also lowers the application approval time frame to get ADUs up to code, so current, existing ADUs. AB 671 requires local governments' housing plans to encourage affordable ADU rentals. AB 116 removes the requirement for enhanced infrastructure financing districts to receive voter approval prior to issuing bonds. AB 1255 requires cities and counties to report to the state an inventory of surplus lands. AB 1486 expands the Surplus Land Act and requires local agencies, local governments to include specified information related to surplus land. Last page. SB 6 requires the state to create a public inventory of local sites suitable for residential development. SB 751, that's a little bit more specific to that area. AB 1010 will allow duly constituted governing bodies of Native American reservation to become eligible applicants to participate in affordable housing programs. Last 2, AB 1743 expands the properties that are exempt from community facility district taxes to include properties that qualify for the property tax welfare exemption. And limits the ability of local agencies to reject housing projects because they qualify for that exemption. And last, SB 196 enacts a new welfare exemption from property tax for property owned by a community land trust. That's a lot. That's a lot of information. I'm sure, I hope there are questions about the 4 that I went over. These ones also I'm happy to discuss and will do my best. That is my email. If there are any questions today that I can't answer, I have cards again, or that's my email as well, but I'm also happy to take questions right now. Yes, right in the front.
Questions for the video?
Oh, yeah, of course. Great, thank you.
So, we have a development on I think it's 5550.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah, 5150.
well, I knew it was on.
It's right by our office, actually. Yeah.
There's been some discussion about, is it really a half mile? Some people say yes, some people say no. How is that half mile measured?
Oh, that's actually an interesting question. So it's measured by walking distance, which I don't know. That's specifically how I read that it was measured. So I don't know. I would assume, I know that there are buses that go through there, so I would imagine that's how they're measuring that half mile, if they're saying that applies.
It's actually the governing code, the half mile definition, and I don't have it memorized, but it's
Okay.
It's actually codified in the governing code for
How they measure it.
Yeah. for public major transit stops as well.
Right. I think maybe I misunderstood the question you were asking.
No, there's some people that said, it's within a half mile, and then somebody put a little wheel and paced it off and said, no, it isn't.
Okay. Yeah.
And the public resource defines this as within half mile of what's called a transit stop, is an intersection of two significant bus routes.
Right.
And there aren't any now Los Altos.
Oh, interesting.
The city attorney's going to issue an opinion, presumably at the next meeting next week.
Okay. I was just answering the question about how it was measured. Yeah. Okay. Great. That's good to know.
That's an issue of controversy, largely because of me.
Ah, got it. Okay. Thanks. Taking responsibility. That's good. All right. I think Gary, you had a question then back there.
So in that long list,
Yeah.
really long list.
Yes, very long list.
I didn't see anything about teacher housing.
I don't believe that there were any bills that specifically addressed teacher housing this year, and this is actually, I think, especially in Assembly District 24, has been fairly controversial about how local school boards and cities are interested in building teacher housing and kind of the public outcry that comes from that. That's something maybe that we'll see in this next year. So a lot of the bills this year that were introduced and that passed through were focused on protecting tenants. And it's anticipated that this next year will be focused more on housing production. So maybe that's something that we'll see, hopefully, we'll see. Yeah, of course. I'm not recapping the questions, I'm sorry, I'm back here.
So I heard that 90% of community college students are housing unstable.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the definition of housing unstable?
Yeah, so I believe that the definition is that they don't have a home. So it's like if they are, not living in an actual home. So that can include like being on the street, literally, or in a car, or it can also include if you are couch surfing. So yeah, that's how that's defined. And actually, I think I messed that up. The housing unstable number, I think, is actually even higher. It's like over 50%, and 19% of students are currently housing insecure. Whereas that larger number, it's like 51 or 57%, don't know where their next month of housing will come from. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, Kim.
I heard an interesting suggestion. I'm sure there are policy pros and cons in terms of a way to possibly incentivize more ADUs, and that is think about exempting new ADUs from property reassessments. Because I think one disincentive for some property owners is if you build an ADU, your property tax is going to go up. So I just want to throw that out as a suggestion that the Assembly might consider next round as a way to further incentivize.
Yeah.
And again, I'm sure there are pros and cons on it, but
Yeah, that's
it
really
seems like
interesting.
an interesting idea to me.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that idea yet about about that, but that's great to hear, and I will pass it along to Assemblymember Berman. Thank you. Great, let's go here and here.
I have a couple of questions about the ADUs, sort of mechanics of it, but as I understand it, you're allowed to build up to 800 square feet of new ADU in spite of existing FAR regulations on the property. So if my property's already maxed out, the largest size house allowed by zoning code, I'm still allowed to build 800 square feet more?
I believe so, but I'm not sure. I mean, I'm seeing some nods, so it sounds
I
like.
just want to be clear, because that's an enormous shift in the way development will be done on residential properties and single family. Secondly, if I understand this right, I can build the ADU within 4 feet of the property line, 16 feet tall.
Yes.
Most local agencies now have a daylight plane regulation of sorts to about 8 feet and sloping inward. So I could now expect my neighbor to have a 16-foot wall 4 feet from the property line?
I think it's 16 feet total, but yes. So not
And there's
necessarily a
is there
16-foot
any
wall.
definition of how the height is measured more carefully, or is it just?
I'm actually not sure of that. I can look into that specifically. I didn't see. Sounds like
And these
some
rules
other
take
people have
effect-
opinions.
These rules take effect January 1st of, so.
Of this year. Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I work in planning, don't come down the door. So there's a little bit of clarification. I actually spoke with people in state CD.
Okay.
There's actually 6 bills, I know you showed 3.
Right.
There's actually 6 that were adopted, and when they were signed, they were chaptered on different dates. My understanding from
Right.
the CD is when a bill is chaptered, that becomes effective law. And so there's actually conflicts within the laws. And my understanding from state ACD is that the state legislature has to go back and resolve those conflicts. That's what I'm hearing, but also I've been to 2 or 3 trainings about the ACD bills. So before you start feeding them the store January 1st, there are some clarifications that the state needs to do. And in terms of the 800 square feet, that's also there's a little bit of confusion. The bills say you have to allow a minimum of the 800 square feet.
Yeah.
One of the bills says you can't use FAR. It's not clear about daylight doing.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of clarification that needs to happen. So I just wanted to
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm happy to look into that. And also, I mean, obviously the legislature creates laws and needs to provide clarification, but we also don't enforce them. So I know, I mean, it's not like we're going to come knocking on your door saying that you need to,
well,
right.
It's just that people have already contacted the city and saying,
Got it.
oh, I'm ready to go January 1st. And
I see.
there are some cleanup legislation that's needed.
Okay. Yeah, and I know that there are conflicts between those ADU laws, and I know that there are some rules about like at what point each bill is chaptered, and then if it's the last one, then that would kind of supersede the others. So, yeah, I'm happy to follow up. Yeah, no, thank you. No, I appreciate that. All right. Were there other questions on these? Yeah.
I have a question regarding the first bills you were talking about, and you were talking about mental health services. I'm just curious about if there's any discussion regarding some of these housing laws or bills, the connection to workforce. So the connection to helping these individuals who are homeless, connecting with workforce services. And things like that. So I think that mental health is number one, but in order for them to be successful in finding more housing, they need a job.
No, understood. And I definitely am not an expert on that, but from my understanding of whole person care services, that is included and I don't know exactly how that funding is being allocated and if it's going to organizations who also specifically or can go to organizations who also specifically provide job training or job kind of assistance. But I do know that based on the definition of what that kind of means usually, that is included in that definition. But I'm also happy to look into that to see kind of more specifically how that's allocated and if that's a requirement of an organization or agency that's using that funding. But it's a great point. Yeah, right here.
I heard that there are 2 ADU bills with kind of conflict, and that one says 800 square feet and the other says 850 square feet.
So I think that's what we were just referring to. And I think it's interesting because the bill text can be really confusing sometimes, and I know AB 68 has both numbers, and so maybe there I think has also been some confusion around that for cities. But again, I think that there needs to be some clarification, just as you were referring to, and I'm not sure at this point what that is going to look like, but I think it's safe to say that probably 800 feet is going to be that minimum. But that's just my guess in this moment. I'm happy to follow up.
And then to follow up on don't be down doors on planning department. So January 1st, our town will be out of compliance because our zoning code is not allowing a lot of stuff that's going on in many pieces. So what is the staff supposed to do?
What is the staff supposed to do?
How are we supposed to deal with it as a town?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. And again, we should talk after because I can definitely try to figure out what resources are available to cities. I know that there are resources. Again, that's not something that we often deal with in our specific roles, but I'm very happy to connect with those resources and help find that answer, because obviously there needs to be education on, it's confusing for us sometimes too, and this is what we work on. So I definitely understand that need. Yeah, oh, sorry, in the back of the room, I think you had your hand raised.
I'm debating, I wanted to give my interpretation of what happened January 1st, so then also necessarily these meetings with the HCD
Okay.
So, anyway, what the text says is that conflicting ordinance is avoided, and it points to a specific section of state code that applies for approvals. And there's a 60-day timeline given for responses under that, and the responses are given that the project is to be deemed approved. That's easier said than done. And so just the definition of conflicting is a legal question. So, yeah.
All right.
That's where we are today.
By conflicting, you mean between the local code in Los Altos and the new assembly laws?
No, the assembly laws
Between the
will be
assemblies.
covered.
When I read the,
There's an ordinance, for example, this ordinance, the code ordinance that says, height restriction shall be 12 feet. That theoretically would be voided by the
new law.
The new law. And then you would point to a specific section in state code to navigate rules.
Right. I think the question was with new laws that conflict with each other, because I think you're absolutely right with what you're saying. But yeah, there's some confusion about these 6, or I think it's 6 bills regarding ADUs and how they relate to each other. Gary, yeah.
So the Affordable Housing Alliance had a very popular, well-attended public community meeting on ADUs last year. Oh, actually this year.
Nice. Yeah.
Anyway, when will these conflicts be resolved? Because I'd like to do another community meeting and actually be able to tell people what the rules are.
So yeah, I'm not sure. I am, again, happy to follow up. That's not something that I had kind of addressed yet, but it's a good point, and yeah, I'm happy to look into that to give everybody some more information. So, yeah, yes.
I was talking to the intervention city and she said that they are at this moment taking applications for ADUs based on what they have flung together of the laws. And so when you said earlier, assume that the minimum would be 800, if it turns out to be higher, fine. They set up basically a spreadsheet, and they're saying if you're applying now, apply as if it's January 1st because they're not going to do it twice. And so that's a matter of politics within the town as to how they want to do it.
Okay, great. Yes.
I noticed on one of your earlier slides that it mentioned funding being available for, I think it was local cities to help them figure out how to apply these things. How does the city tap into that? The city's trying to figure out how to sort this out, or maybe short the staff, how they tap into the state funding pool to get additional funding for planning support?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I was trying to figure this out yesterday because, again, it can be pretty confusing exactly how that funding gets allocated. And so it looked like the largest portion of the funding is going to go to cities who are like creating, going through their RENA process, like a new RENA cycle. And there it breaks it down based on population, how much a city actually gets. And I don't remember the exact numbers. I can help figure that out. But also there is another bucket of money that it said it's a competitive grants process. So I don't think that there's any funding in the very short term, but it's something that absolutely can be accessed in the future. Again, if especially city people have specific questions about that, I can follow up and find exactly the numbers and the information that you need.
So as under the SB2 funds, small cities have $160,000
Okay.
through their process.
Right.
I believe there was another 25 or 30 million dollars. It was actually less than that. There was another comparable amount.
Oh, okay.
Change codes and anything
That-
that was related to streamlining housing production.
And that's access in the shorter term?
Yes.
That's already been.
That got adopted and obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
So the SB2 funds, I believe it was also supplied for those.
Okay.
160,000 or smaller. It was documented, you just have to fill out applications at
Yeah.
the state.
Okay.
That money is available.
Great, okay, thank you. That answers that as well.
I
Yes.
have another question on accessing funds.
Mm-hmm.
So in the case of we were talking about homelessness, and that there's $1 billion available to help cities and counties fight homelessness. I'm just thinking in terms of our community college, and I'm involved with a group that's helping to find students who are veterans, housing, and that's a pretty dire situation. Is that something that will be available? Do you have any idea how we can go about accessing that, or when?
Yeah, so similarly, I'm not sure of the exact specifics on that one, but I would love to follow up on that. Obviously, that is a really important issue, and yeah, I mean, I am happy to look through the budget and try to figure out.
The community college bill that Mark was working on has been delayed.
Right.
It's just a really high need right now.
Absolutely.
House some of these students and veterans. And you'll be working on that bill again then in the new cycle, I guess?
I think it's unclear at this point. I know that the bill was changed to a point that made it kind of unrecognizable in a lot of ways, unfortunately, yeah. So I don't believe so, but I'm not sure specifically of Assemblymember Berman's intentions at this point. Yeah, definitely. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
I'm just curious, just kind of going off this whole discussion for Los Altos in this community. If there's something, if there's a meeting that we can have to really make this simpler, because it sounds like rather, as we move forward maybe with the ADUs, it just seems like so much to navigate through, who is willing and to do this.
Yeah.
Do you really want it to happen? I mean, I just think of, knowing a bunch of people who are right next to Hillel College, who maybe they have a full family house for 5 or 6 kids, and now there's only maybe 2 of them living there, that would be up for converting, but this sounds just very daunting. Is there something that we could do to help along the process? Because I know a number of them, while they may not want to hold homeless encampment, or that was the feedback from the community, they may get from having, a veteran or, a community college student right there, right around the corner, if they get converted and understand it all. It's just, it sounds so complicated that that it would be nice to navigate through if we really want this to happen in our community, especially right there by Hillel College. Why not?
No, so I think there are 2 really important parts to what you just said. And one is that there is, a current crisis for students who are, facing homelessness and are literally in people's, well, not literally in people's backyards, but are very close to people's homes in Los Altos Hills. And so the bill that Assemblymember Berman authored was not intended at all as a long-term solution, and something exactly like what you're saying it could be a long-term solution. And what's difficult with AB 302 is it was really intended as like a Band-Aid, like a short-term reprieve for students who are, sleeping in their cars or on the streets every night. And so that was really unfortunate, because also the bill had like a 2 or 3 year sunset. I'm forgetting exactly at this point. But so secondarily on the ADU point, I mean, we absolutely are happy to work with cities if they have specific questions or need help navigating. We need help navigating as well, all of these laws, and we rely on our capital staff and also, different assembly agencies or departments to go through it. And so we're happy to work with cities. We love to work with cities and be a partner in this regard, because we understand how important it is in increasing housing production for the exact purpose you kind of just stated. It's having available housing for not only students, but everybody else who is really struggling in this area to stay here. So yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Kathy Sherry's had to go to the match holes in rooms in your home with people who need a room.
Yeah.
And that was another one of our community programs that was well attended.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was there.
There's interest in that. So why not spend some money on promotion and outreach?
So actually, I know that there has been quite a bit of promotion. I know that Santa Clara County, as well as many other counties in the state, have enthusiastically agreed to participate in this 100-day challenge that Governor Newsom challenged counties to participate in, where they house 100 people in 100 days. And so that's obviously a great way of not only building awareness for this issue, but also literally getting people housed. But on top of that, like I said, you know, a fifth of the country's homeless populations lives in the state of California, and even though those programs are so necessary and so great, there's a bigger need as well. And so the only way that we can alleviate that crisis is to create more housing, to increase housing production and make it affordable for people to live here, in my eyes.
We need it all.
Yeah, literally, we need it all.
Are there any cities that are doing an educational program with their residents? Because it seems to me maybe LACC should work on that, but create a meeting where we really reach out to the community. Anybody who's interested in the potential of building an ADU, come to a meeting, have you and have other experts there really help lay this out and simplify it, because that's the whole point. We're trying to simplify it and streamline things. So, do you know anybody else who's done something like that?
Yeah, Zach has an answer for this.
Does this every year. Palo Alto does, and I get maybe similar, I don't know exactly the definition, but Palo Alto board with the city staff does an annual building ADU. And I know in the county of San Mateo itself, they work together and they brought together a bunch of their cities that did something more sort of broad spectrum that breaks down to a city what it looks like, and then brings together all brings together folks who teach how to do it and put it in the workbook and the specific city by city piece of that workbook as they should figure out what fees are, what your allowances are, etc. So Santa Clara County is very different sort of piece than San Mateo County. And so there's, especially where we are in Santa Clara County, but there are folks around who are working on it. And because at the end of the day, we're not going to know, I mean, we can read your legislation, but HCD and then city staff, which I also appreciate this little overground city staff, but they're the folks who, with the help of HCD, will be interpreting this, because we don't interpret the laws. And sort of to circle back to another point that's been made a few times, conflicting laws, the last chapter one is the one that takes precedent if it's the same section that's being amended. If it's two different sections of code that are being amended, then it sort of just comes to the courts. It gets to that point. And then it depends on intent, and that's been interpreted by the courts. So some of it is outside of the scope of what was altogether. But I think that's a great idea for saying a lot of folks want to build them. And I know that sort of the northern part of our district, the northern part of our district has done a little bit more to make it easier for folks to build one, and the southern part is sort of still working on. So.
Thank you. That's a really good clarification. Yeah.
Do you know the sequence of chaptering of AB 68, SB 13, and 88, 81? Those are the three regarding the ADUs, and
right.
Each of them has a paragraph in the bottom.
I know, yeah.
Thing, but I can't figure out which one was approved last.
I actually don't know, and I know, because I was looking at that, and again, I can help.
If I send you an email, maybe you can get an answer to that?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Because without that, you don't really understand.
I can't figure it out, I'll find someone that can. Great, thank you. Yeah, so I don't know, if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to talk right now after this, but I want to respect your time. I think it's just a couple minutes to 9:30, so thank you. Did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Ruth, for
a
really informative session.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Definitely got something to build off of, and maybe come back and address a larger group of our residents, which would be fantastic. I also have here a summary. I don't know if this came from you. This is a summary. From Phoebe. Thank you. Of all the ADU legislation. So pass this out, do some in the back. But just to kind of summarize everything that we talked about specific to ADUs.
Oh, great.
Cool. And then otherwise, I just want to say that our group is going to take a little break for the holidays, but we'll be back in January. I believe mid-January we'll have Sarah Chafin coming to talk about affordable housing and teacher housing. And then after that, I think Vila Zelka from the Manzanita Talks, Manzanita Project is going to come and talk about regional transportation and sub-regional transportation. So we'll send that out. We'd like to get you all on our email list. We can keep you updated on different things. And hopefully you've all left your email address with Jen. You have that scan sheet. All right, so pass these out. Thank you all for coming.